Good morning and welcome to a beautiful sunny and warm ride that I nearly never made it out for today because this morning there was a horrible drizzly haze hanging in the air and I just couldn't be bothered to come out. But come lunchtime, the sun has come out, the weather has dried up and I'm out on a gravel trail because since building this budget Chinese carbon fibre gravel bike, I've kind of neglected the gravel trails close to home. I've taken it up to Thetford Forest in Norfolk and Rendlesham Forest in Suffolk, but yeah, I've neglected my local trails a little bit, but that ends today. And so as I've brought the gravel bike out today and I've had a few rides on it now and been able to get to grips with it a little bit, I thought now would be as good a chance as any to give you a real world review of it. And I'm going to do that on the local Flitch Way, which is a beautiful off-road gravel path that runs all the way from Bishop Stortford up to Braintree. But as you can probably tell, I'm not quite on it yet. So let me get off of this very bumpy and overgrown field, and once I get on to the actual Flitch Way, we can start having a chat about the bike. Let's go. Okay, well after 4 miles of rugged, bumpy fields, we're finally on the Flitch Way. So let's get this review started. Okay, so first off, the frame set, and this is made by a company called Seraph, and it is their GR047 variety. The 47 denoting that the bottom bracket is a T47, and that is good for a number of reasons. One is that it's a screw-in, which I really like because there is nothing worse than a squeaky push-fit bottom bracket. Believe me, I've heard enough complaints about them. And two, the bottom bracket shell is absolutely massive, which makes it very handy for running hoses and cables if you wanted to, which I have on this bike. But I'll come back to that a little bit later. Oh, and on the point of the T47 bottom bracket, I'll mention this now because I had a comment on my build video with someone asking the exact shell width size for this frame, because apparently T47 comes in quite a number of widths. That's always helpful, but this bike specifically is 86.5 millimeters wide. So hopefully that helps you if you need to buy the bottom bracket for it. But otherwise, the frame comes with the frame itself, the fork, and the seat post, as well as the derailleur hanger. I know that last bit might seem obvious, but it's not always the case, so I thought I would just mention it. The frame also has a number of bottle bosses and screw rivets all over it, in the forks, on the top tube, on the down tube, and on the seat tube, which means you know that it will be great for a bike packing adventure bike. The frame is also set up for full internal cable routing, and so as an optional extra, I bought the fully internally routed handlebar from Seraph as well, just to make sure that I had exactly the right handlebar and spacers for the steerer tube, because I didn't want anything going wrong on this build. However, you can, if you so wish, buy a separate handlebar of your own choosing. You don't have to buy Seraph's on at all, but I did. As I say, I wanted to make sure that it all went together perfectly. Now, as I say, it does come with a carbon fibre seat post, and I should just point out that when I first took this bike out on the Garmin Ride Out event, it was creaking ever so slightly, and I was a little bit concerned about it because it sounded like it was going to break any moment. But when I get it home, I put a bit of carbon gripper paste on it, put it back in, and it hasn't been a problem since. So hopefully it was just the two dry carbon fibre surfaces of the seat tube and the seat post that were rubbing together and didn't like each other. But yeah, with carbon gripper paste in, no problems at all now. Now the frame took about 3 weeks to come through, which was actually quicker than I expected it to, because this is actually a custom paint job. I think they sell them in the standard matte black, and you'll get it a lot quicker if you go for that colour. However, I decided I wanted something with a splash of colour, so I went for this lovely muted green, matte green as well. I do love a matte frame. Now this frame is a 53 centimetre, which concerned me a little bit. I did contact Seraph before I bought it, just to make sure that I was getting the right size frame, as having looked at the sizing guide on their website, it showed that my size should be a 53 centimetre frame. Now my road bike from Trifox is a 58 centimetre frame, so yeah, you can see why I was a little bit concerned. But as is often the case these days, a lot of manufacturers have their own sizing conventions and processes, and that's clearly the case for Seraph as well, because once I'd received the frame and held it up against the side of my road bike, it was pretty much spot on, exactly the same size. So yeah, always check with the manufacturer beforehand to make sure that their sizing guide is correct and that you are getting the right size frame. So in terms of price, this frame cost me £566 or $745. Now I mentioned the dollar amount because you do have to pay in dollars. I paid via PayPal, and actually it was a very simple process to convert the sterling into dollars, so that shouldn't be too much of an issue. But just to make you aware, about £120, £130 or $150 worth of that frame cost was the shipping cost. Now someone left a comment on my build video the other day asking why, when you buy a frame that's slightly more expensive, the shipping cost always seems to be a little bit lower, and then when you buy a frame for about £400, the shipping cost is always about 150, £100, something like that. And he may have a point there that the company are subsidising the postal cost for the low-cost frame, and that, you might think, is a bit underhand. However, I don't see it in any way different to the Ryanair model. And if you're not aware, Ryanair is a very cheap budget airline in the UK. The initial price you see for a flight might be around £5, and then you realise you have to add about 30 quid each way for bags, seat reservation. If you want to use the toilet, I think they might start charging you soon. And while a lot of people get annoyed with that practice, ultimately, even when you add all of those additional costs in, it still ends up being a very cheap flight, or in this case, a very cheap frame, because 566 quid for a full carbon frame with a custom paint job, I think, is very good value, especially when it rides as beautifully as this one has. It's lovely and light, it feels nice and aero, and it just feels an absolute joy to ride. But that is also largely down to the other components, so let's move on to them. Now, when looking at the group set to potentially put on this bike, I was looking at the likes of L2 and Sensar, because as this was going to be a cheap Chinese build, I thought, well, why not go for a cheap Chinese group set? However, thanks largely to the John Pye & Sons auction website, which I've spoken about extensively in previous videos, I managed to find myself in possession of a full Shimano GRX setup. Now, I didn't buy it all in one go, I got it a little bit here and there, and so I ended up paying just 250 quid for the entire group set. Now, because of that, I have ended up with a bit of a mishmash of versions. And if you didn't know, there are 3 different versions of Shimano GRX. There is GRX 400, which is Tiagra level in the road world, GRX 600, which is 105 comparable, and GRX 800, which is Ultegra level. So the shifters on this thing are GRX 600 along with the brake calipers, but the front derailleur is GRX 810 and the rear derailleur is GRX 812. Now, the difference between the 810 and the 812 rear derailleur is that the 810 will only take a maximum of 32 tooth cassette at the back, I think it is, whereas the 812 will take up to a 42 tooth cassette. Now, as I said, I didn't decide any of this beforehand. This wasn't my choice. It was just a happy coincidence that I really wanted a large cassette at the back, and that I ended up with a rear derailleur that could handle one. Now, someone did mention on the build video that on the Shimano website, the GRX 812 rear derailleur states that it is a 1x compatible rear derailleur only. So I thought I'd better take a moment just to explain that a little bit. Now, as most of us will know, a rear derailleur really has no bearing on how many chain rings you can have at the front. All it does is control your shifting at the rear on the cassette. However, having looked at the Shimano website, they do indeed say that the GRX 812 rear derailleur is only for use with a 1x system, but I have this working perfectly on a 2x at the front. Now, I think the reason that Shimano are saying that it's a 1x rear derailleur is not to say that it will only work with a 1x system up front. It's just that because it is a long cage that will take up to a 42 tooth cassette, if you've got 42 teeth at the back, you really don't need 2 chain rings at the front. You could probably get away with a single 36 tooth chain ring at the front and have all the gears that you need to go up any sort of hill or speed down any decline. So while yes, the 812 rear derailleur does say it's 1x compatible, it does actually work perfectly with a 2x, as I'm showing here. And while we're talking about the 2x crank up the front, this one is a 4630. And again, it's been working perfectly. I seem to have ample gears for going uphill and downhill, and I haven't yet managed to spin out going downhill or not have enough gears when I need to go up the steepest of climbs. Now for the cassette at the back, because this is a cheap Chinese build, I couldn't go for mainstream components the whole way through, so it is actually a ZTTO branded 11 to 42 11-speed cassette, which cost me just 26 quid from AliExpress. And okay, I haven't put that many miles on it yet, but it seems to be working perfectly so far and showing no signs of slipping, skipping, or any other bad behaviour that you don't want from a rear cassette. Now the final major component of this bike are the wheels, which I got from Elite Wheels on AliExpress. Now I have waxed lyrical about this company's wheels too many times in past videos, and I'm not going to stop now because these ones have been absolutely beautiful so far, just as have my road bike wheels that I've got on my Trifox road bike frame. However, whereas the road bike ones I have are 50mm deep aero wheels, these are just 35mm but 32mm wide. I thought that would give me a good blend of aerodynamics but also less weight, and let me tell you, they roll absolutely beautifully. Now again, as I said earlier, I've not done that many miles on this bike yet, but if the 4,000 odd road miles I've done on my road bike wheels are anything to go by, then I've got no reason to think that these gravel wheels won't be just as good. And when you consider that both sets of wheels that I've got are the value budget ENT series, and they cost me just £288. £288 for the pair, that is, not each. That represents absolutely incredible value for the quality you're getting. So when you add up all the other little bits and pieces that I've added to this bike, like the bar tape, the Garmin out front mount, along with the pedals and the chain, the entire cost of this bike comes up to £1,188, which I'm sure you'll agree is an incredible price for a beautiful light carbon fibre gravel bike. And on the point of light, it comes in at around 9.7 kilos. So it's not going to challenge my 7 kilo road bike anytime soon. But remember, this is a gravel bike and you do want a little bit of weight to it, because when you're flying down a gravel trail, the last thing you want is to hit a stone and for the bike to get thrown to one side instead of the stone. Now, full disclosure, there are another couple of bits and pieces on this bike, such as my 43mm Panaracer Gravel King tyres and the Charge Spoon saddle that I'm currently sat on, and I haven't added those in to the full cost equation. And the reason for that is I already had those for a previous build, so I felt like it would be a little bit unfair to add those to the final cost. But even if you did, that would still only add about an extra £100 to the full cost, which I think still gives you an unbelievable price. Right, so with all that said, I've got another 8 or so miles to go to the end of this ride, so I'm going to go and enjoy that. But when I get back home, I'll give you some final thoughts on this entire build. Right, well there you go, a beautiful, dry, dusty and filthy 20 miles done, but that was a lot of fun. And that is what gravel bikes are all about, fun. Now don't get me wrong, riding on the road on my road bike is also fun, but there's just something about throwing a willing and capable bike through some dusty, dirty trails off-road, especially as it means there's no cars to get in your way. Now, one thing I did forget to mention while I was talking about the group set is the fact that it's hydraulic brakes, but it is fully mechanical, not electronic. Now, I mentioned that because, as I mentioned earlier, with the T47 bottom bracket, it is nice and large, allowing you plenty of room to get your fingers inside the bottom bracket shell to move any hoses or cable housings around. The problem is that I think that this frame was designed for electronic shifting in mind, because when I tried to run the hoses and the cables through the internally routed handlebar, it was a bit of a push. In fact, it was so much of a push that I gave up on it in the end, and luckily the underside of the bar had a little channel that I ended up running the cables in anyway, and then it disappears down into the head tube. So if you are thinking of buying this frame, bear that in mind, in that if you are wanting to fully internally cable route it and you are using gear cables and hoses, it might be a little bit of a pain trying to route them through the handlebar. Again, I got it done eventually, but it was a little bit of a struggle. But otherwise, that ride was full of hard compacted gravel, there was some loose shingle, there was quite a bit of dry dusty dirt, but this frame handles all of them perfectly, and I am incredibly happy with how it's turned out. But what do you think? Just under £1,200 for a full carbon fibre gravel bike. I've asked it before and I always get some mixed results, but it's always interesting to see your views on whether you guys would trust one of these cheap Chinese carbon fibre frames. As I mentioned before, my road bike I've now done 4,000 miles on, and that is still performing admirably. And on that point, if you did want to buy one of these frames for yourself, Seraph have actually given me a discount code, which I'll put in the video description below. Now, Seraph haven't paid me for this review, and I bought the frame and every part of that bike, all the components and everything, with my own money, so I'm not getting paid. This isn't a brand deal or a sponsorship, but if you were to use the link below and the discount code, I may receive a small commission. Costs you nothing extra, but it does just help me a little bit to keep running this channel. But anyway, let me know your thoughts below. Do you think £1,200 for this bike is worth it? I am always keen to hear your thoughts. And on that note, I'm going to go in and get myself a shower because I think I am covered in filth at the moment. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you found that interesting, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.